We have with us Professor Aijaz Ahmad to discuss the developments in West Asia and North Africa. Aijaz, we have been discussing this for some time now. Egypt has fallen, Libya seems to be in the throes of a major change, events in Bahrain, Yemen, all this are happening. Overall strategic terms, do you think there is a difference that is taking place to the region?
Praveen, the only question is, how dramatic really the strategic shift is. So far, I don't believe it is significant or significant. I don't think Egypt has fallen. Mubarak has gone. The rest of the regime is there. Mubarak and Suleiman are gone, but the rest of the regime is there. The military dictatorship is there. They have been successful in sending the protesters back home. Now, the working class is very much isolated. They're going on with their strikes, and a very small number of protesters who are still there. The government has said that these strikes are illegal. They use force against the strikers who are still there in Tahrir. There was no reaction from the larger body of the protesters who have been there. I personally think that it was either a mistake or something worse than a mistake, that as soon as Mubarak's resignation was announced, the protesters declared victory. If this was a genuine uprising against the regime, the protesters would have demanded a far more radical change than that, which is what the Tunisians kept on doing even after Zainul Abidine had left. They kept demanding, and to this day they are demanding that. Now the Prime Minister Ghannouchi has resigned there. There are tens of thousands of people out there in Tunisia saying even this is not enough. We need a completely new setup now going into the elections. In Egypt, we saw nothing of the kind. They accepted the military dictatorship and declared that as a victory. So I think the signs from Egypt are quite ominous. Of course, the Mubarak regime and its extreme policies will not come back. Of course, there will be some shift in their relationship with Israel. There may be some shift on the issue of Gaza. The Palestine Authority is already in great crisis, especially after these Palestine papers. And what's going to happen internally in Palestine is very unclear. But again, Egypt's completely one-sided support for the Palestine Authority, for Mahmoud Abbas and his gang, just following the American dictates. That probably shall be modified. So there is that issue strategically in Egypt. The other really serious flashpoint, strategically speaking, is Bahrain and Yemen, the softened underbelly of Saudi Arabia. In Bahrain, in eastern Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, and so on, is the Shia population that is concentrated there. And the Shia population in all of these states is the most marginalized, the most oppressed, sort of a rural proletariat, if you wish to call it that. And they're the majority in these states. So a democratic movement in Bahrain will necessarily be a majority Shia movement, although that is not what is happening in Bahrain. It is a genuinely democratic movement from the marginalized and the poor. It's also where the Fifth Fleet of the US is located. Now, again, we don't know how far this will go, whether or not this will spread into Kuwait, into eastern Saudi Arabia. We don't know. There are some rumors of Saudi police already having come across the causeway into Bahrain to manage some of this. We don't know how far this is going. But now there's going to be, I think, a ganging up of the Gulf Cooperation Council in Saudi Arabia on the issue of Bahrain. Then there is the Yemen, which is supposedly the epicenter of Al-Qaeda in Arabia, according to the Americans. There are two different crises going on in the Yemen. One is that the North-South Federation is cracking up.
It's a much older fracture, if you will.
It's much older than this latest uprising, but part of the strength of the uprising comes from that. And the other thing, there has always been a tension, or rather there has been for some 5-7 years, a great tension between the power of the tribes in the mountains and the oligarchy in Sana'a. And the latest news seems to be that there is emerging a sort of a council of the tribes in the mountains. Now, if there were to develop a real unity between that and the rebellious people in the south, plus the Sana'a-based insurgency, you have first-class crisis on your hands. Now, hundreds of thousands of workers have been in and out, Yemeni workers have been in and out of Saudi oil fields and have a very potent sort of anger at the way they got treated there, the way they got dismissed there, and so on. So there's a very strong anti-Saudi sentiment in the Yemen. Both of these things may destabilize Saudi Arabia in some ways. We don't know how far this will go. Any significant change in the power equation in this region will necessarily strengthen Iran. Any significant shift in Egypt will certainly favor Iran. And in that sense, one sort of nightmare going on in Washington is that just as Turkey turned over 5 years and is continuing to turn in relation to Israel, if the insurgency in Egypt succeeds even halfway, you might see the beginning of the same kind of thing in Egypt, not a repudiation of the peace treaty with Israel the next day, but slow and gradual shift, which over 4 or 5 years, you then have cordial relations between Turkey, Iran, and Egypt, and Israel isolated among these 3 major powers in the region. That is the nightmare scenario, both in Tel Aviv and in Washington.
You know, that's an interesting way of looking at it. And if you think of it in this way, that you have Egypt on one hand, where you have political stagnation for almost 40 years now, if not more, in which the normal political processes were not allowed to continue. In fact, even Nasser had clamped down on this before his death. And certainly under Anwar Sadat and as well as obviously Mubarak, this has continued. So the normal political processes, if they take place, trade unions, women's movements, student movements, political parties, then a shift of the kind that you are talking about is far more likely than under a completely, what shall I say, a completely frozen political system which Mubarak was presiding over.
If what you're calling the normal processes get re-established in Egypt, you are in a very, very different sort of ball game. But about that normal processes, let me say 1 or 2 things. One is that one of the enduring legacies of Nasserism is a very strong tradition of trade union movements and professional syndicates, as they are called in Egypt. That is to say that white-collar professionals have their own syndicates and so on. So 28% or so of the working class in Egypt is unionized, which is a very, very high number, one of the highest probably anywhere in Asia or Africa or anywhere in the world probably. And these are genuine unions. They may have had, under sheer force of dictatorship, maintain some sort of relationship, many of them, with the regime, but that's not what they are. They're not a product of the Mubarak regime. That's one thing. The other is the fascinating changes that are taking place among the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the Muslim Brotherhood. You have the old guard, which is whose politics are very well known. We need not spell that out. Then around the 1980s, a kind of process started among the Ikhwan, which is very similar to the ruling religious party in Turkey, of second tier of the bourgeoisie, which was not a part of the regime and which was being pressed by the regime, sort of a fraction of the national bourgeoisie, started entering the Ikhwan al-Muslimin. And as they entered the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, some of the extremity of the Ikhwan's historic positions started getting mellowing down. Then more recently, within the last 10 years, the great success story for Islamism, as they call it, they always keep talking about terrorism, but they never talk about Nasrallah and Turkey. Every message that has come from Nasrallah to Egypt says it is a people's revolution, Muslims and Christians are working for it together, all parts of society are working for it together, and so on and so forth. A Muslim force that claims to be the last bastion of Lebanese nationalism, and which is inclusive. And then Turkey. Now, a new generation has come into the Ikhwan which wants something like that. In fact, much more like Turkey than even Nasrallah, socially not as conservative as Hezbollah. Socially, very much like, they're socially conservative, but they want women, they want all sorts of social freedoms of various sorts. Now, if there are elections tomorrow, or 6 months down the line, Ikhwan will be a major force in that.
It is the best organized.
Best organized in it. What kind of political expression the working class will have in that parliament, we are yet to see what kind of political parties will be thrown up. The liberal middle class, if there is a tie-up between the liberal middle class, the working class movement, and you have a credible political force which has nothing to do with the past regimes, on the one hand, if the political confrontation really is between them and the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, both forces would be highly detrimental to Israeli interests.
And of course, the US interests.
US interests via Israel. You know,
Not directly
they might,
so much.
they might be actually much more accommodative to foreign capital coming in and market forces and this, that, and the other. But the entire strategic locus of American policy, strategy in the area, which is Israel, to that extent anti-American.
The same modality that, for instance, Turkey is following.
Absolutely, yeah. But you see, because Egypt is a directly involved party.
Absolutely. It has borders with Gaza. It has borders in Sinai with Israel.
Last poll taken by American agencies show that 93% of Egyptians detest Israel. They have fought wars. They have given blood. And memories in that part of the world are long. So they are directly involved parties. And again, the entire Arab world has taken its cue from the shift in Egypt. It is the coming of Sadat, it is Sadat's strategy policy towards Israel, which then determined the policy of the rest of the Arab world.
You know, we talked about Nasrallah, Hezbollah. There's also been a shift in Lebanon, which is sort of in this current political scenario has been sort of lost sight of a bit, that Saad Hariri's regime has fallen. And we have a new prime minister who's actually backed by Hezbollah. So even there, a strategic ally of the United States has actually weakened.
See, Americans were all gung-ho going to get Hezbollah through this commission of inquiry appointed by the Security Council under U.S. pressure against Hariri's assassination, the father Hariri's assassination, and that report is going to come and it was going to indict Hezbollah leaders and so on and so forth. Hezbollah and others said to Saad Hariri, please sit down, let's talk about it. He, from his own standpoint, made the strategic mistake that he decided that Americans were somehow going to save him. And he refused. Preemptive strike, Hezbollah and allies overthrow his government and manage to form government. Had that remained the situation, Americans would have still gone ahead and speedily implemented that plan. And in that event, I would not have at all ruled out the possibility of an Israeli invasion to implement the Security Council resolution. At that point, the uprisings came. So Lebanon was, in a certain sense, saved by Tunisia and Egypt. Whatever happens in Tunisia and Egypt, we shall see. But Lebanon has been saved.
That note, there is another country which has emerged a little better off because of this. A possible Israeli strike on nuclear installation in Iran does not look likely after the events in Egypt.
That's now just gone.
That's just now gone.
Absolutely.
So Egypt being knocked out of the equation temporarily means that Iran currently cannot be attacked, its nuclear installations cannot be attacked.
The great symbolism of Irani warships going through the Suez to the Syrian ports after 35 years of a ban on them, immediately after the departure of Mubarak, just symbolically.
So let's look at it that in terms of symbols, even though the peace treaty stays, but there are signs of change taking place which show the equation.
Why did this military junta sitting in Cairo make that decision, that show that symbolism? In order to appease the Egyptian masses. We have heard you. We know we are going to change policies. The public pressure works. The immense expression of that public outrage was so great that even after the demonstrations are over, by and large, the regime still wants to stabilize itself by granting these symbols. And these symbols have a material reality of their own.